Hey everyone, welcome to episode 8. Today's episode is not an original idea of mine. I stole it from this book called The Four Agreements, a practical guide to personal freedom. If you have video, I'm going to be uploading this episode to YouTube, so you could probably watch it there. But in case you're just doing the audio version, this book is called The Four Agreements. I was given this book as a gift about 8 months ago, and it's one of the most significant, life-changing books I've read. And I know that sounds like a big claim. It's a bold claim indeed, but it really is highly transformative. If you read one book, or if you're into audiobooks, if you're going to listen to one book in the next 365 days, I highly recommend you check out The Four Agreements. But moving on, the first thing that this book tells you is that, and I'm paraphrasing here and I'm putting it in my own words, right? So please know that the book itself, I can't do it justice by just talking about it, right? I want you to read it so you can really read it for yourself, right? So you can really know what I'm talking about here, because it's definitely gonna be worth your time, and it's not very thick. Basically, this book says that we all live in this dream, and this dream is our reality. Each of us has our own dream. Each of us is living in our own reality. And our reality is shaped by everything that we experience from the moment we're born until now. And that all of these things, how we're raised, how we're treated, how we're taught to do certain things and be a certain way, everything shapes who we are and shapes our reality, and it shapes our dream. So every single individual, every single human on this planet is operating with their own individual version of reality. There is no one version of reality, because all of us, every single one of us, has our own version of it, which is kind of a little bit crazy, but it's kind of interesting, because you know how sometimes you might say, I can't believe somebody did that, or how do people do this, or how do people do that? Well, they do it, or they do this or that because that's their reality. That's in their reality, in their world. They're operating based on their programming that they've been raised with, all the things they've grown up believing. So that alone is like, interesting. So the person who's speeding in the school zone because he doesn't give a flying F, despite knowing that it's a school zone, he's doing it because whatever happened in his reality allows him to think that it's okay. Or if someone has an anger problem, and again, now that becomes subjective, if somebody seems to be angered easily, what was it in their reality that allows them to operate that way and that think that that is the way that one should be? They're probably thinking, why isn't everyone seeing what I'm seeing? Why isn't everyone else as enraged about this as I am? And in their minds, they may not even be illogically upset about something, right? So we could just go on and on and on. And please don't take any of this as an excuse for people's bad behavior. I certainly am not excusing anyone's bad behavior. It's more so just trying to see, or at least accept the fact that not everybody operates the same way we do because they grew up a different way. And it's so simple. It's such a simple concept. Well, of course they grew up differently. They didn't have the identical life that I had. That's practically impossible. It's impossible for another individual on this planet, even if they are a twin, to have the same exact experiences at the same exact moment as the other twin. So that is just crazy, right? So I'm going to move on. So the first thing that this book says is we all have our own dream, and we all live in our own dream. But the first agreement out of the four is be impeccable with your word. And I'm like, okay, well, that's good, right? It's important to choose your words wisely. But it doesn't just tell you that you should be impeccable with your word. It helped me realize that perhaps the people in my life that raised me, and perhaps the influences in my life were not so impeccable in their word. And then that allowed me to become some of those negative things, such as a people pleaser, a martyr, a self-sacrificing, whatever. So it helped me recognize some of that in myself. And I wanted to read an excerpt out of this book for you, because when I read this, it truly resonated with me. You may know of my history just a little bit. I've kind of alluded to it a couple of times in past episodes, but I was living in a toxic marriage and for 10 years. And at that point, it was a third of my life. Actually, not 10 years. Technically, it was more like 9. So basically, a third of my life until I got divorced was spent in a very unhealthy, destructive relationship that was a significant part of my life. I mean, I was home all the time, or I was working all the time, or at one point I was a stay-at-home mom. So I was basically home all the time. And so my entire world was being a stay-at-home mom in this closed little environment. And I behaved in ways that I'm not proud of, and I tolerated things that I probably should have never tolerated. But the reason I was the way I was, and the reason I stayed as long as I stayed, was because of the dream in which I was living, in which I put up with it because of my reality thus far. So fast forward years later, I've been divorced since 2018, and now it's 2024. So I read this book, The 4 Agreements, and the first chapter in it is actually called Domestication and the Dream of the Planet, which is kind of what I was referring to, the dream. And then I read this page in the first chapter, and it blew my mind. Here's what it says. In your whole life, nobody has ever abused you more than you have abused yourself. And the limit of your self-abuse is exactly the limit that you will tolerate from someone else. If someone abuses you a little more than you abuse yourself, you will probably walk away from that person. But if someone abuses you a little less than you abuse yourself, you will probably stay in the relationship and tolerate it endlessly. If you abuse yourself very badly, you can even tolerate someone who beats you up, humiliates you, and treats you like dirt. Why? Because in your belief system you say, I deserve it. This person is doing me a favor by being with me. I'm not worthy of love and respect. I'm not good enough. We have the need to be accepted and to be loved by others, but we cannot accept and love ourselves. The more self-love we have, the less we will experience self-abuse. Self-abuse comes from self-rejection, and self-rejection comes from having an image of what it means to be perfect and never measuring up to that ideal. Our image of perfection is the reason we reject ourselves. It is why we don't accept ourselves the way we are, and why we don't accept others the way they are. I read a little extra there, but the part that really resonated with me was where it says, if someone abuses me a little less than I abuse myself, then I'm going to tolerate it endlessly. Well, I don't want to just say it's on the other person, right? Because I put up with it for a reason. I put up with it because they treated me slightly better than I could treat myself. In this case, I felt like staying in the marriage was safer than leaving, because if I left, I have no idea. Am I going to be able to provide for myself? Am I going to be able to take care of myself? And so it was safer to stay, because on my own, no idea if I can take care of myself. But if I stay in this marriage, then at least I have food, shelter, clothing, and of course my kids are here, so I love my kids. I'm not going to mess up what we've got going on. But when it got to the point where I felt like I deserved better, where I could do better for myself, that's when I left. When my marriage got to the point of how I was treated is worse than how I would treat myself, is when I finally woke up, and when I finally realized, yeah, I don't have to live like this. And it's because photography saved my life. I think I may have mentioned this in a previous episode, but photography saved my life. And it saved my life because I finally saw myself as worthy. I finally saw that I'm actually good at something, that I can have a purpose, that I can be productive, that I can have an income. Because remember, when I became a stay-at-home mom, I lost my sense of purpose, and all I did was like just function, barely function, rather. And it was a miserable way to live. And before I continue, I want to say I am fully responsible for my part in the dynamic that allowed me to stay in an unhealthy relationship. Had I been kinder to myself, had I treated myself better from a younger age, perhaps I wouldn't have gotten into the relationship that I did that allowed all of the bad things to happen down the line. But at the same time, the reason I followed the path that I did was because based on my reality, based on my dream, based on everything that I had grown up with, I was doing the best that I could. And that's the other thing about ourselves, that we have to, I had to have some grace with myself. I say we have to do this or that. What I really mean is what I had to do. You don't have to do anything. You can just listen to this, or you can turn it off anytime you want, right? But what I had to do is forgive myself for being an idiot. Because at the time, I didn't think I was being an idiot. At the time, I thought, I'm being a good mom, I'm being a good wife, I'm being a good daughter, I'm following my path, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm, at the time of everything going on, that was the best I could do. It was 100% the best I could do. And if I knew any better, I would have done better, but I didn't. So I have to accept this about myself. I had to accept that I didn't value myself. And the reason I didn't value myself is because of a million different reasons, including how I was brought up and my sense of insecurity and all of that, right? But I can't just blame others. I have to take some ownership. And the other thing is, we have to dig deep. And this part is not always easy to do. We have to dig deep into our pasts. And that means thinking back to our childhood. I had to think back to my childhood. I always thought, well, my parents were nice to me. My brothers got spankings and I didn't really get spankings. And, my parents treated me well and I always had food to eat. And, my parents are still married and I never saw my dad beat my mom or anything like that. My dad used some bad language, but, overall, I couldn't say that I was raised in a horrible environment. And, when I say horrible, that's subjective. Again, that's subjective. Depends on who you are and what your reality is and how you were brought up. Horrible to you might be, told you have to go to bed at 7 p.m., while horrible to somebody else might be abuse, like physical, sexual, mental, emotional abuse and neglect in childhood. So it's all subjective. Everybody's got their own experience, right? That's why, again, back to the very beginning of this podcast, we all live in our own little worlds, our own little dreams. So, I had to go back and I had to dig deep and I had to figure out, well, why did I become who I did? Why did I get married at 22, 23? Why was that such a urgent matter for me? Why did I not stick up for myself the first time something didn't feel right? Why did I tolerate bad behavior and excuses? And I had to dig deep, and again, not easy to do. And I, for sure, if my parents are listening to this, I'm not blaming them because they were brought up the way they were brought up and they did the best that they could do, right? So it's not about blame, but it's more like just understanding why. And then I think about it. I don't really remember my parents being especially affectionate or being positive towards me unless I did something to earn it. So while they didn't neglect me, they didn't abuse me, they fed me and clothed me and made sure I had a roof over my shoulders, that I was safe, all these positive things, right? But looking back, I realized I had to get good grades, or I had to have some sort of a talent or a skill. I had to be of service. I had to do something in order to receive attention. And it's, again, not my parents' fault. They were busy working. They worked their asses off. So perhaps I learned to perform for approval. I learned to be a people pleaser. I learned that if I want to be loved, I have to prove it. I have to earn it. I have to show that I deserve your love. And I have to excuse your neglect or behavior. That's not even like going to get factored in, because what I do know is that if I want affection, I need to earn it. The other thing that I grew up believing was that I was ugly. And it's because I was teased for my appearance. And it was at a very young and vulnerable age. I think I was like 9, 10 years old when people started pointing out the fact that I have a round nose. And when I would cry, my nose would turn red. And my brother, my older brother, along with others, would say that I have a clown nose, or Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. So first, my feelings are hurt for whatever reason, and then I start to cry. Then I get made fun of for having a red nose when I cry. So that was one. And then my older brother also would call me chubby sometimes, and I was not chubby. I was a normal, well-fed kid. I was a kid that ate lunch, breakfast, and dinner. So I wasn't skinny, but because I was called chubby, I started to believe that I must be fat, that I'm ugly. You better believe it hurt my self-esteem. So now I start to believe I'm ugly. And if I believe I'm ugly, then I am going to be seeking desperately proof that I'm not ugly. And how do I get that proof? How do I prove to myself that I'm not ugly? What's going to cancel out this belief? And sadly, the answer to that was male approval. A man telling me that he thought I was pretty would hopefully cancel out this deep set belief that I was ugly. And anytime I was interested in someone and they weren't interested in me, it didn't matter how old I was, right? Like, it didn't matter if I was in middle school or high school. Well, not middle school, forget middle school. I was just trying to survive. But I had crushes on people in high school, a lot of people. And if they didn't like me back, I took it as proof that I must be ugly. Or if they maybe liked me a little bit, but they liked somebody else more, boy, did I feel rejected and did I feel ugly. So further reinforcement that I must be hideous. It must be my nose. It must be my feet. It must be that I'm chubby. And so I grew up thinking I'm hideous. And again, I don't blame the people who said those things now as an adult. First I did. First I blamed people for what they said. Then I realized after reading this book, and even before reading this book, but this book kind of helped, speed things up a little bit. I realized that they said those things for their reasons, and I will never understand those reasons, and I don't need to understand those reasons. It's for them, and it's not my problem or my baggage to figure out, or my responsibility however you want to word it. Now, fast forward, I meet this guy as a college student. I'm in my last year. I meet this guy. He's attractive enough. He's successful enough. And on top of that, I wanted to get away from my living situation. I was living with my parents when I was in college. And the way I was living, I felt like I had very little control over my own life. I was constantly being forced, or at least I felt forced, even if they weren't forcing me to. I had to be the good daughter. I had to be the good girl. If I needed if I wanted approval, I had to earn it. I had to prove it. So I didn't want to ruffle any feathers. My brothers would just be like, no, we're not helping. My parents had multiple businesses. And so I felt it was up to me to go ahead and step up. And so I had a lot of resentment towards my family. I had tons of resentment towards my parents for putting all this on me when I was in college, full-time college student teaching, had a job in the retail side, and being asked to help my parents with their businesses. So I didn't really have a social life. And again, all of those things were causing me to be resentful, but they were also causing me to want to run away. And the way to run away is, in my mind, get married. Get married and get out of this situation. So I meet this guy online. I meet him on Match.com. And I had some success meeting people online previously as well. It never worked out, but I would match, would go out. But in this particular case, it ended up being like one of those really breakneck, fast-paced romances where like within 2 months we were engaged, and then within 9 months of our first date, we were married. And despite some what you call red flags, I didn't end things because of multiple reasons. I felt lucky that somebody loved me. Or even if they didn't love me, they saw me worthy. They saw me as pretty enough. And they would be willing to marry me. Wow. Okay. So why would I leave that? Why would I leave this one chance at a happy life? Even if things didn't always feel right, even if things didn't sound right, even if he said and did things that rubbed me the wrong way. We got married and things got worse. And I put up with it because I'm like, well, I don't want to disappoint other people. And let's just say we were not impeccable with our words towards each other. And when I say it was a toxic dynamic, I'm going to go back to a previous episode where episode 1, I talk about how all of us have the beauty and the beast inside of us, and all of us have some positive and negative traits of each one inside of us. Well, I grew up believing that being a martyr is the way you are. It's just the way you are. And because my parents argued and bickered a lot, I thought it was pretty normal, So when my marriage was in a good place, and by good, I mean relative to what the bad stuff was good enough. And then when things would get bad, that's when I would realize, yeah, not cool. This is worse than I would treat myself. I wasn't thinking that at the time, but now that after reading the book, I realized some of the time in my marriage, I was being treated worse than I treated myself. Again, because of my fear of leaving, because I thought I could never do any better. And I was lucky that somebody even wanted to spend their life with me. We stayed together for 9 years. I want to point out that I'm not blaming my ex-husband. I had a lot of anger towards him in the beginning of the divorce process. And it's been more recent in the last year or two that he and I actually get along now. While it would never be like we get back in a relationship, right? We co-parent well together. We can communicate enough to keep in touch about the kids. We know how to handle the important things. I just want to make it clear that I put up with bad behavior, and that's on me. I put up with it because I, for whatever reason, believed that that's what I deserved. And I know I've said this a bunch of times, but I guess maybe you can relate. I don't know. Maybe you can relate to having put up with something because you felt like this is as good as it's going to get, even though you hoped it could be better. So I guess my takeaway from this episode is that first little excerpt I shared with you about how we abuse ourselves. Well, a lot of that abuse is verbal. We verbally put ourselves down. We may not do it out loud. We might do it all internally in our little heads, in our thoughts, in our minds. And we beat ourselves up. We're critical of ourselves. I'm not saying everybody is this way. I mean, some people are like in really good shape. And that's amazing. I'm so glad. Like, we need people that are healthy and happy and have good childhoods and positive upbringings, to help some of us out, and to help balance things out for those of us who got a little bit screwed up on the way. So my big takeaway is notice the way you talk to yourself. And I'm going to have to talk more about being impeccable with your words in another episode. But I want you to notice how you talk to yourself. What was it about your childhood? What was it about the way people spoke to you or the way that you spoke to yourself? What did those words imply? So, and this could be something like this. If when you were growing up, your parents kept doing everything for you, you may have grown up thinking that you're not self-sufficient enough, or maybe you're not smart enough to make it on your own. And you became very dependent and needy because you felt like you weren't prepared. Or perhaps your parents punished you constantly and you had to be perfect all the time. Like, you had to get straight A's. And if you didn't get straight A's, you were not a good person. It could be a million different things. And you may not even recognize them right away as something negative. It's just the way it was, If I've never experienced anything different, how would I know that what I'm experiencing is not good? We only know what we know, right? If there were moments in your life that you can remember where you felt hurt by the words of somebody that you trusted and that you looked up to, or that somebody that should have taken care of you, and they might have taken care of you, but then every once in a while they may have said things, and it doesn't take a whole lot. It takes a one-time instance of negative words being spoken to you, and that's one of the things in this book. It just takes one instance of somebody not being impeccable with their word to do possibly irreparable damage. And to be able to dig it out and find those types of hidden memories is not easy. But if you ever find yourself wishing you could do better, if you find yourself being unhappy with where you are, if you find yourself wondering if there's something better out there than what you're living right now, then I would ask you to think about, why are you there? Why haven't you left? Why are you still at the same job? Why are you still in the same relationship? Why are you still in touch with that friend? Why? What is it about your dream, your world, your reality that allows you to be treated the way you are, that makes you uncomfortable or unhappy? And why are you staying in it? What's your fear? What's the fear that's holding you there? And that's a whole new episode on its own too, fear and the power of fear over us. I'll save that for another time. But I want you to think about it. What is it? Why? And also, as you do this digging, feel that anger, feel that resentment, feel that sadness, feel those emotions. Acknowledge those emotions. We're taught not to have negative feelings. It's okay to be angry with so-and-so for doing what they did. It's okay to be upset or hurt. It's part of the process. It's part of the journey. And it may take some time to heal from it. But I want you to remember, as you're doing this and as these things come up, it was hard for me as I was going back and thinking to all the negative words that were spoken to me. It was hard for me not to be resentful to the sources of the hurtful words. But I had to remind myself that every person that's ever hurt me was doing what they were doing based on their dream, based on their world, based on their reality. And it wasn't because I deserved it. They didn't treat me badly because I deserved it. They treated me the way they treated me because they wanted to. They chose to. And it's not my fault, and I don't need to own it. I didn't deserve any of the negative stuff that was said to me that was hurtful and not constructive criticism. If you find yourself feeling those negative feelings of anger and you want to call them up and be like, you suck, I can't believe you did that to me, like you're a piece of... That's not really being impeccable with your word, right? Because now you're like tearing someone else down for doing what they thought was right. But at the same time, it may be an important part of the healing process for you to reach out and say, hey, when you did that, it hurt. But it may be better not to reach out at all. It may be safer not to reach out at all. It may be safer to acknowledge that what they did wasn't kind, that it hurt you. It did potentially permanent damage, right? Hopefully not. Hopefully after you do some reflection, you realize that you're operating under these false beliefs. But understand that whether or not that person ever apologizes, I had to take ownership of my part and why I put up with it. And also, I have to let it go. I have to let go of that anger, of that resentment towards that person, because they may never change. They may never realize what they did hurt me. But as long as I hold on to that anger and that pain, it's going to keep hurting me every single day. And I'm going to keep living the way I've been living. And I'm going to keep repeating what I've been doing. And I'll basically be stuck in this living hell. So in order for me to break free of that nasty, horrible place that sometimes might come out from this reflection, remember, they were doing what they thought was right. And regardless of whether or not you agree with it, it doesn't matter if they apologize or not. At least you understand why you are affected by it, or at least you even recognize that you are affected by it, and you let it go if you can at some point. And the reason you let it go is not because they are not responsible for their actions and words. You let it go because when you let it go and you accept that you didn't deserve it, you can maybe start to heal some of that. I hope that by the end of this episode, you've possibly thought about your reality, your dream, why you are the way you are. And I hope to see you again soon. I hope to record another episode soon, and I hopefully will get into being impeccable with your word, or perhaps once I think about it, maybe it's time to move on to one of the other agreements or a different subject altogether. But thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope to see you next time. Have a great day.